Okay, so uh, you know how we're always talking about productivity and time management and all
Yeah.
that. Well, get this Einstein, the genius, the guy who redefined gravity.
Mm-hmm.
Turns out he wasn't really into those rigid to-do lists.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah, so we're diving into that today, exploring his approach to productivity and creativity without being tied to, those never-ending lists.
It is kind of a fascinating paradox, right? We often picture geniuses with super detailed plans, but Einstein, he seemed to get that real productivity. It's not about cramming your day, it's about focusing your energy on what actually matters.
Totally. It's like that whole thing about working smarter, not harder, right? But
Exactly.
how do we, actually DO that? I mean, we're constantly bombarded with messages about like maximizing every minute, squeezing in another side hustle, achieving peak performance. It's like honestly kind of exhausting.
It really is. And that's actually the heart of the problem. We've fallen into this trap of thinking that, like, more activity equals more productivity, when often it's the opposite.
So, if time management, as we usually think of it, is a trap, then what's the alternative? Should we just like toss out our calendars and just, hope for the best?
Well, not exactly. It's more about shifting our perspective, I think. The research we've both been looking at points to a few key ideas that, kind of resonate with Einstein's approach. One is this concept of accepting our limitations.
Okay.
Did you know that, like, the average human lifespan is only about 4,000 weeks?
Wow, 4,000 weeks. That really puts things in perspective.
Right. And that realization can actually be pretty freeing. When we finally accept that we can't do everything, it forces us to prioritize what really matters. It's about saying yes to the essential and letting go of the rest.
So instead of drowning in a sea of to-dos, we need to, like, pinpoint our big rocks, those truly important projects, goals, and make sure we're giving them time every single day.
That's it. It's about making those big rocks the foundation, making sure they get the attention they deserve, even with all the other smaller tasks swirling around.
And how does this, connect back to Einstein's way of being productive and creative?
Well, Einstein seemed to understand that creativity needs space. It needs those moments of quiet reflection where your mind can wander and make those unexpected connections. And by, prioritizing his big rocks, he created the space for those moments to happen.
This makes me think about that point in one of the articles about how constantly trying to clear the decks can actually make us focus on the least meaningful tasks. It's like we're so busy checking things off our list that we forget to even ask ourselves if those things are even worth doing in the first place.
Yeah, that's a great point. We often find ourselves prioritizing those tasks that feel urgent but aren't really important.
Right.
It's like, cleaning your house before a party instead of using that time to catch up with those friends you haven't seen in ages.
Or like stressing over your kid's sleep schedule instead of just enjoying some cuddle time. It's
Yeah.
like we're so focused on controlling the future that we totally miss out on savoring the present moment.
Exactly. And that brings us to another important concept from the research, the causal catastrophe.
Okay.
It's the idea that our obsession with planning and predicting the future can actually, rob us of the joy and spontaneity of life.
It's like that feeling when you've planned every single detail of your vacation, and then you get there and you're so busy sticking to the itinerary that you don't actually experience the place you're in.
That's exactly it. It's like we're trying so hard to control the narrative that we miss out on the actual richness and unexpected beauty of what's happening around us.
Okay, so we've talked about like accepting our limitations, prioritizing those big rocks, and being mindful of this causal catastrophe. But how do we actually, put these ideas into practice in our daily lives? Do we need to become hermits and meditate in caves to like escape the tyranny of the to-do list?
Haha, no, not at all. It's about finding a balance, a system that works for you, something that allows you to be both productive and present. And that's something we'll definitely dive into deeper a little later. One way to, create a system that works is to kind of reframe how we think about time itself. Instead of seeing it as something to conquer or manage, what if we like embraced it as this flowing river, something to move with rather than against?
Okay, that's a beautiful image, but
Yeah.
like how do we actually apply that when we're dealing with deadlines and demands all the time?
Well, it starts with a mindset shift, I think. One of the sources we were looking at talked about this idea of, I don't mind what happens. Now, before you think I'm saying we should all just become passive, hear me out.
I'm listening. This does sound kind of radical, though, especially with how much our culture emphasizes achievement.
Yeah, it is a bit radical. But what if, instead of holding on to a super rigid plan, we approach each day with more of an openness, like a willingness to adapt to whatever comes up?
So instead of stressing over every little detail, We focus on being present and just responding to what comes up.
Exactly. It's about cultivating a sense of trust in the process. Trust in our ability to navigate, all the ups and downs of life without needing to control every single outcome.
This reminds me of that story, the one about the watermelon problem. The idea that sometimes the best solution is to, just watch and wait, let things unfold naturally instead of trying to force a solution.
Yes. We're so used to jumping into action, trying to fix things immediately, but sometimes that's the worst thing we can do. Think about it. Have you ever been struggling with a problem and then when you finally step back and give it some space, the solution just appears?
All the time, like writer's block.
Yeah.
You're struggling to write something, and then you take a break, go for a walk, and suddenly the words just start flowing.
That's exactly it. And it's not just for creative stuff either. This applies to all sorts of things like, interpersonal conflicts or big decisions. Sometimes the best thing you can do is just observe, gather info, and let the situation develop before taking action.
Okay, so patience is key, even in a world that's always pushing us to go faster. But how do we actually cultivate patience when everything is competing for our attention? It's like we're addicted to speed, always trying to outrun our own anxieties.
It's a real challenge for sure. But one way to cultivate patience is to practice mindfulness, to really focus on being present. One of the sources talked about this interesting exercise where you pick a painting at a museum and look at it for 3 hours straight.
3 hours. I can barely focus on a social media post for 3 minutes. But I get it. It's like training our attention, strengthening that ability to focus.
Exactly. It's about resisting those urges to, check our phones or jump to the next thing. And the more we practice, the easier it gets. Like any skill, it takes time and effort, but the rewards are huge.
So cultivating patience is like building a mental muscle.
Mhm.
The more we use it, the stronger it gets. But what about those times when we just feel overwhelmed, like our to-do list is going to
Well,
explode?
that's where radical incrementalism comes in. It's about accepting that we can't do everything overnight. Instead of aiming for these huge leaps forward, we focus on making small, consistent progress every single day. Think of it like a marathon, not a sprint.
So instead of trying to write a whole book in a weekend, we commit to writing, like a page or two every day.
Exactly. And consistency is key. It's about showing up, even when we don't feel like it, even when the progress feels small, because all those small steps over time can lead to amazing results.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm definitely guilty of putting things off until I have a big block of time, but then that time never seems to appear.
It's a common trap. We overestimate what we can get done in one go and underestimate the power of small, consistent effort over time.
So it's about finding a rhythm, a sustainable pace that lets us make progress without burning ourselves out.
Exactly. And everyone's rhythm will be different. It's about being aware of your own energy levels, your own needs and limits, and finding a way to work with them instead of against them.
Okay, so we've talked about prioritizing those big rocks, cultivating patience, and embracing this radical incrementalism. But how do we actually translate this into something we can use? What are some practical steps people can take to create a system that's flexible but still effective for both productivity and creativity?
That's a great question. And you know what? I think we should definitely dive into that. All right, so let's think about how to make this practical.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground, right? From those limitations to patience, it's a lot.
hmm
But like the big question is, how do we turn all this into something that actually works? You know, a system that's both productive and creative without being like chained to that to-do list.
Yeah, it's all about finding what works for you individually. But there are definitely some things we can take from Einstein's way of doing things. Remember those big rocks we were talking about? Those essential projects or goals?
Mm-hmm.
Well, instead of just thinking about them, actually schedule them.
Oh, interesting.
Like block out time in your calendar, just like you would for a meeting.
I like that. It's like a standing appointment with your most important work. Or even like a meeting with yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And don't let anything mess with that time. It's easy to let other things fill it up, but those meetings, those have got to be non-negotiable.
This is where that whole accepting limitations thing comes in. You know,
Yeah.
you're saying no to some things so you can say a big yes to what really matters.
Okay, so we've got those big rocks scheduled in, but then there's all the other stuff, the smaller tasks that, still need to get done. What about those?
Well, that's where being okay with not clearing the decks comes in. It's about being all right with the fact that you're not going to get to everything. And that's okay. Instead of spreading your energy too thin, focus on what really makes a difference, what actually aligns with those big rocks.
Yeah, that's definitely easier said than done. Those unfinished tasks can really start to weigh on you. They can, for sure. But it all comes back to perspective. Instead of seeing those unfinished tasks as failures, see them as like proof that you're making choices about how you spend your time.
Oh, I like that. So it's
Yeah.
like those unfinished tasks are actually a sign that you are focusing on what matters most.
Right. And this connects back to that whole I don't mind what happens idea. It's not about being passive, but about being flexible. You've got a plan, you're prioritizing your important stuff, but you're also ready to adapt when you need to.
So it's like finding that balance between like structure and flexibility,
Hmm.
intention, and just being open to whatever happens.
Exactly. And remember, sometimes the best way to tackle a problem is to just let it be for a while. Take a step back, see what's happening, and let the solution kind of come naturally. Just like that lawnmower that guy couldn't fix until he stopped trying so hard.
Ah, yes. That story was so good. It's like we're so used to instant results that we forget that some things just take time.
And that rush, that constant push for efficiency, it can actually get in the way of creativity. Einstein, for example, he was known for taking long walks and playing the violin. He knew that giving his mind space to wander, to make those random connections, it was important for his creative process.
So it's not just about managing time, but about managing our energy and our attention too, right?
Right.
Sometimes the best thing we can do is actually step away from work and
Uh,
do something that nourishes our mind and spirit.
Definitely. And that's something I really want to emphasize for everyone listening. Find that rhythm that works for you, one that balances focused work with activities that help you recharge. Whether it's a nature walks, listening to music, spending time with people you care about, whatever helps you come back refreshed and ready to be creative.
And it doesn't have to be some big thing, right? Even little breaks throughout the day can make a difference.
Oh, absolutely. Taking 5 minutes to breathe, stretch, and just be present in your body, it can totally reset you and help you approach your work with fresh energy and focus.
So wrapping up this deep dive into how Einstein approached productivity and creativity, I think the main takeaway is that it's not about becoming some sort of productivity robot. It's about finding a way to live your life that feels meaningful, making deliberate choices about how you use your time, and, finding joy in the whole journey, not just the destination.
I couldn't have said it better myself. And remember, you don't need to be a genius to live this way. Start small, make little changes, and trust that you'll figure out what works best for you to have a more fulfilling and creative life.
And on that note, we'll leave you with this. What's one small step you can take today to be more intentional about how you use your time? It could be scheduling that meeting with yourself,
Mhm.
putting your phone away during dinner, or just taking a moment to appreciate where you are right now. Whatever it is, trust that even small changes can make a big difference in how you experience life.